Emily Allen stood frozen in the kitchen, her heart pounding in her chest as she stared at her mother's lifeless body. Carol Allen, the woman who had controlled every aspect of her life, the woman who had pushed her to the edge, was now gone. In a single, violent act, Emily had shattered everything: her family, her future, and the fragile world she once knew. What drove a daughter to kill the one person who was supposed to love her unconditionally? At first glance, the Allen family appeared to be just like any other in the quiet suburban neighborhood. Their home, a large white two-story house with neatly manicured lawns, seemed to embody the American dream. Carol Allen, a woman in her early 40s, was often seen tending to the flowers in the front yard or greeting neighbors with a warm smile. She was the epitome of a loving mother, always dressed in pastel colors, exuding a gentle, caring demeanor. Her daughter, Emily, was just as perfect. A bright, 17-year-old high school student, she was an honor roll student, an accomplished pianist, and the kind of teenager every parent dreamed of raising. Her sparkling blue eyes and calm, collected nature made her a beloved figure in the community. People would often compliment Carol on how well behaved her daughter was, how Emily seemed to always have everything under control. The bond between mother and daughter appeared to be unshakable. Carol often talked about how proud she was of Emily, how the young girl had everything she needed to succeed in life. There was no hint of the turbulence that lay beneath the surface. Their life, from the outside, seemed ideal. But the reality inside the house was far more complicated. While Carol's love for her daughter was unquestionable, it was also suffocating. She wasn't just a mother to Emily. She was a constant presence, overseeing every part of her life. Carol believed that in order to protect Emily and guide her to success, she needed to have control over everything, from her schoolwork to her friendships to her future. Carol would make decisions for Emily, not just as a parent, but almost as though Emily was an extension of herself. There was little room for Emily to make her own choices or carve out her own path. Emily, for years, had done her best to live up to her mother's expectations. She followed every rule, worked hard in school, and wore the mask of the perfect daughter. But inside, she felt trapped. As she grew older, she began to question the control her mother had over her life. The once loving and supportive relationship had become more like a cage. Carol's constant need to monitor Emily's every move suffocated her. She couldn't date without her mother's approval, couldn't hang out with her friends without Carol checking in constantly. Every aspect of Emily's world was tightly controlled by Carol's invisible grip. There were moments when Emily tried to assert her independence, small acts of rebellion like skipping a curfew or voicing an opinion that differed from her mother's. But each time, Carol would quickly shut her down, always with the same calm, almost eerily soothing words. "I'm doing this because I love you, Emily. I'm doing this to help you." As the months passed, Emily's frustration began to grow. The walls she had built around herself to survive Carol's dominance started to crumble. She no longer saw the loving, protective mother everyone else saw. Instead, Carol had become a jailer, and Emily was desperate to break free. The more Carol pushed, the more Emily pulled away. But the emotional toll it took on her was undeniable. She began to withdraw from the world around her, from the friends who once adored her, and from the life she felt she was forced into. Carol, of course, noticed the change. She would ask Emily what was wrong, but Emily would always respond with a forced smile and a vague excuse. The tension in the house grew thicker with each passing day. Emily had become resentful of her mother's dominance, and Carol, perhaps, sensing the distance, became even more overbearing, holding tighter, wanting more control, convinced that if she just kept Emily close enough, she could protect her from the harsh world outside. Neither of them could see that they were spiraling into a destructive pattern, one that would eventually spiral beyond control. The days leading up to the tragic night were like any other, at least on the surface. The Allen household was quiet, the kind of stillness that suggested everything was normal, even though a storm was quietly brewing underneath. Emily had been more withdrawn than usual, spending most of her time in her room, away from her mother's watchful eyes. Carol had noticed this change, of course, and it bothered her. But as usual, she chalked it up to typical teenage behavior. She's just going through a phase, Carol would tell herself, trying to brush off the feeling that something was terribly wrong. But deep down, Carol knew it wasn't just a phase. There was something else happening, something Emily wasn't telling her. It was late in the evening when the argument began. The tension that had been building for months reached its peak that night, a point of no return. Emily had come downstairs for dinner, and as usual, Carol had prepared her favorite meal, chicken and potatoes, a family tradition that they had shared for years. Carol tried to strike up a conversation, but Emily wasn't interested. She barely picked at her food, her gaze fixed on the table. Carol noticed the coldness in her daughter's eyes, the distance that had been growing wider with each passing day. "Emily, what's going on with you?" Carol asked, her voice soft but laced with frustration. "You've been so distant lately. Is there something wrong?" Emily didn't respond immediately. Instead, she pushed her plate away and stood up, her movements stiff. Carol's heart sank as she watched her daughter's retreating figure. This wasn't just normal teenage rebellion. Emily was shutting her out completely, and it hurt. "I'm fine, Mum. Just leave me alone," Emily muttered, her voice thick with irritation. Carol's face hardened. The protective mother in her flared up, the need to control and shield Emily from whatever was making her act this way, overtaking any sense of compassion. "You're not fine, Emily. You need to stop shutting me out. I won't let you spiral down some dark path. You're still my daughter, and I'll do whatever it takes to help you," Carol insisted, standing up as well. Emily's anger flared. "You don't get it. You don't understand. You don't let me live my own life. I'm not a little girl anymore, Mum." The words stung more than Carol expected. Her mind raced. She wanted to argue, to force Emily to understand that she was only doing what was best for her, but something in the way Emily said it, so sharp, so desperate, made Carol hesitate. For a brief moment, she saw the pain in her daughter's eyes, but it quickly turned to cold defiance. "I don't need your help, Mom," Emily spat, her voice rising. "I just need you to stop controlling me." Carol felt a rush of panic. This wasn't just a typical argument. It was a breakdown, a fracture in the very fabric of their relationship. She reached out, grasping Emily's arm to stop her from walking away, to hold on to the last thread of connection she had with her. "Please, Emily, please don't leave me. I'm just trying to protect you. You have no idea what's out there in the world. You don't understand." But Emily jerked her arm away violently. Her anger and frustration had built up to a boiling point, and with a trembling voice, she finally let out everything she had been bottling up for so long. "You don't control me anymore, Mum. I'm not a little kid and I'm not your possession. I can't live like this anymore. I hate you," Emily screamed, her words tearing through the tension that had been building for months. Carol was taken aback, her heart aching at the rawness in Emily's words. The mother inside her wanted to reach out, to console her daughter, to remind her that everything would be okay. But something in Emily's eyes, the wild, desperate look that had replaced the usual calm, sent a chill down Carol's spine. This wasn't just an angry teenager lashing out. This was something far deeper, a cry for help that Carol hadn't fully understood until that moment. The silence that followed was deafening. Emily stood there, her body trembling with the weight of what she had just said. Carol, stunned, didn't know how to respond. She felt the familiar urge to take control of the situation, to try to fix it, but deep down, she realized that something had shifted, irreparably. Emily was slipping away, and there was nothing Carol could do to stop it. In the hours that followed, the house remained quiet, a heavy air settling over it. Carol tried to calm herself, but the overwhelming sense of loss loomed over her. She couldn't shake the feeling that something irreversible had just happened, that the last vestiges of her control over Emily had slipped through her fingers. As the night wore on, Emily locked herself in her room, her mind spinning with thoughts of escape. Her mother's words, her suffocating presence, had become unbearable. She had to find a way out. It wasn't just about rebellion anymore. It was about freedom. Freedom from the years of emotional manipulation, from the constant grip that held her in place. Neither of them knew it yet, but that night would be the turning point, the moment when everything unraveled. Neither Carol nor Emily could see that their lives would be forever changed in the hours that followed. What began as an argument over control would soon evolve into something darker, something neither of them could ever have anticipated. The night had settled into a heavy silence, as though the world outside had held its breath. Carol sat in the living room, her hands trembling slightly as she stared at the family photographs on the mantel. Each one seemed to mock her now, the happy moments, the vacations, the birthdays, all of it now distant and hollow. The love that once felt like a solid foundation was now a distant echo. Emily's words still rang in her ears. "I hate you." It wasn't just a passing moment of anger. There was something more in that outburst, something deep and painful that Carol hadn't fully understood at the time. But the truth was beginning to settle in, painful and undeniable. Her daughter was slipping away. Meanwhile, in her room upstairs, Emily was not crying or screaming. She was sitting motionless on her bed, staring blankly at the wall. The weight of everything, her years of confinement, the constant control, the suffocating love, felt too much to bear. She had tried to push back for so long, but each time her mother had smothered her attempts, always convincing her that it was for her own good. But tonight, everything had shattered. The words she had spoken, the feelings she had been suppressing, for years had finally broken free, and now there was no going back. For a moment, Emily considered leaving, running away. The thought of escaping to a place where her mother couldn't find her seemed like the only solution. But she quickly discarded the idea. Where could she go? She had no money, no real plan. All she had were the lingering feelings of resentment, frustration, and betrayal. Her mother had made her feel like she was never good enough, like she was always just one mistake away from being unworthy of love. And now, in this suffocating silence, Emily realized something terrifying. She was trapped. Her mind began to race, spinning with dark thoughts. She couldn't keep living like this, constantly controlled and scrutinized. But how could she ever escape her mother's grasp? It felt like there was no way out. The fear of her mother's dominance was like a vice tightening around her chest, making it hard to breathe. And in that moment, something inside Emily snapped. She stood up abruptly, pacing the room, her breathing shallow, her heart pounding in her chest. She needed to take control. If no one would give it to her, she would take it herself. Her thoughts were clouded by anger and a desperate need for freedom. She had tried for years to get away from her mother's relentless control, But every time she fought back, Carol found a way to pull her back in. Tonight, Emily realized there was no escaping this dynamic unless she did something drastic. The idea consumed her. She grabbed her phone and sent a quick, cryptic text to a friend. She wouldn't tell them everything, but enough to make it clear she was in distress. Then, without thinking, she grabbed the bottle of bleach that had been left in the cleaning closet downstairs. It was a powerful chemical, the kind Carol always kept stocked for deep cleaning. But tonight, it was something else entirely. Tonight, it would be her way of taking control. Emily made her way downstairs, careful not to make a sound. The house was eerily quiet, the stillness only broken by the soft hum of the refrigerator. Carol was still in the living room, her back turned, lost in her thoughts. Emily stood in the doorway, watching her mother's figure for a long moment. She could feel the heat rising in her chest, the pressure building inside her like a volcano ready to erupt. Carol didn't notice her. At first, and when she did, it was too late. Emily moved quickly, surprising her mother. Carol barely had time to react before Emily struck. The first blow was violent, more forceful than she expected. The knife she grabbed earlier was not just an instrument of defense, it was a symbol of her anger, her desire to end the cycle that had kept her trapped for so long. The attack was quick. Emily's mind, clouded with emotion, focused only on the end, on the final, irreversible break from her mother's grip. Carol, struggling to understand what was happening, fought back. But the strength of Emily's resolve was overpowering. After the initial shock of the attack, Carol slumped to the floor, her breath shallow, her face frozen in an expression of disbelief. Emily stood over her mother, breathing heavily, the weight of the moment crashing down on her, the act of violence, something she never imagined herself capable of, seemed almost surreal. But in that moment, it was the only way she knew how to escape. In a haze of confusion and guilt, Emily didn't know what to do next. She was left with the grotesque aftermath of her rage. Carol's body lay before her, and the sound of her own pulse seemed deafening in the quiet house. In a strange, detached way, Emily found herself reaching for the bleach. It was almost as though she was trying to erase everything. The years of control, the anger, the betrayal. She began the process without thinking, scrubbing at her mother's skin, desperate to rid the scene of any trace of what had happened. She was wiping away the past, trying to cleanse herself of everything that had led her to this moment. The smell of bleach was overpowering, clinging to the air and mingling with the sickly sweet scent of blood. But Emily couldn't stop herself. She continued, her hands trembling as she worked, as though in some twisted attempt to purify both herself and the woman she had just killed. At that moment, Emily wasn't thinking clearly. The frenzy of her emotions had clouded her judgment, and the reality of what she had done hadn't yet sunk in. All she knew was that, for the first time in her life, she felt in control. The house remained eerily silent after Emily's actions, the only sound now being the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. For a long while, she just stood there, her hands shaking, staring down at her mother's body. The world around her felt as though it had stopped, frozen in time. Her thoughts were a blur of panic, guilt, and confusion. What had she done? How had things spiraled so far? The anger that had fueled her actions was now replaced by a deep, hollow emptiness. She hadn't expected it to feel like this. As she stood there, surrounded by the growing stench of bleach and blood, reality began to seep in, slowly and painfully. Carol's lifeless body lay at her feet, and Emily realized she was completely alone. She had taken the life of the one person who had been her everything, her protector, her oppressor, her mother. The weight of that truth was suffocating, It was as though the ground beneath her had cracked open, and she was falling into an abyss of her own making. For a long time, Emily couldn't bring herself to move. The thought of what to do next paralyzed her. What happened now? Was there any coming back from this? The years of resentment, the crushing suffocation of her mother's control, had led her to this point. But now that the deed was done, Emily couldn't escape the horrifying reality. Eventually, instinct kicked in. She couldn't stay here. Not like this. Not with her mother's body in the middle of the kitchen. She quickly grabbed the phone from her pocket, her fingers trembling as she dialed the only number she knew could help her now. But as the phone rang, Emily hesitated. She didn't want to call the police. She couldn't bear the thought of explaining what had happened, what she had done. The shame was unbearable. She wanted to disappear, to erase the past, to forget it all. But as the phone continued to ring, the weight of the situation pressed down on her even harder. There was no running from this. The phone rang once more before it was answered. It was a close friend, someone Emily had known since middle school. They had shared laughs and memories, but Emily hadn't reached out to them in months, not since the rift with her mother had started to deepen. Her friend's voice on the other end of the line was bright and hopeful, unaware of the chaos that had unfolded on the other side of the phone. "Emily, hey, what's up? You okay?" Emily struggled to find the words. Her throat felt tight, her body trembling with each breath. I don't know what to do. I need help. Please, you have to come over." Her friend's tone shifted immediately, sensing the panic in Emily's voice. "What happened? Are you all right?" I did something. I didn't mean to, but..." Emily's voice cracked, her breath catching in her throat. "Please, just come over. I need you." Her friend didn't ask any more questions, sensing the urgency in Emily's plea. They agreed to come over immediately, telling her to stay calm. Emily didn't know if she could be calm, but she knew she had to wait. She couldn't do this alone. As she waited for her friend to arrive, Emily moved through the house in a daze. Her feet felt like they were walking through a fog, her mind disconnected from the reality of what she had just done. Every step she took felt like it was in slow motion. Her hands, still covered in bleach, gripped the walls for support as she made her way to the bathroom. The bleach had burned her skin slightly, but she hardly noticed. She stared at herself in the mirror for a long time, not recognizing the person who looked back at her. The reflection seemed distant, as though she was seeing someone else's face. She splashed water on her face, trying to wash away the tears, the sweat, the horror. But no matter how much she scrubbed, the weight of her actions remained, like a stain that would never come out. There was no way to undo what had been done. Emily's mind raced with frantic thoughts, her body on edge, but she couldn't escape the reality. There was no going back now. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, snapping her out of her trance. It was a message from her friend. "I'm on my way." A small part of her, a tiny sliver of hope, told her that maybe this would be the end of it. Maybe her friend could help her find a way out, a way to fix this mess. But deep down, Emily knew there was no fixing this. There was only facing the consequences of her actions. The time for running was over. When the knock came at the door, Emily jumped, startled by the sound. Her heart raced, and she took a deep breath before opening the door. Her friend stood there, wide-eyed, taking in Emily's disheveled appearance. "Emily, what happened?" Emily couldn't speak. The words wouldn't come. Her friend stepped inside, their gaze immediately falling to the disarray in the kitchen, the bleach-soaked floor, and the cold, lifeless form of Carol. For a long time, neither of them said anything. The reality of the situation was impossible to ignore. It was all too much. Finally, Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. "I didn't mean for this to happen, but I couldn't take it anymore." The minutes stretched on like hours as Emily stood frozen, her friend's eyes darting from her to the grim scene in the kitchen. There was no denying the truth now. The reality of what Emily had done was undeniable. Her mind felt detached from her body, as though she were watching the events unfold from outside of herself. The room was spinning, but in the midst of her dizziness, a quiet voice in her head kept repeating, "This is your life now. You can't escape it." Her friend, still standing at the door, looked at her with wide, panicked eyes. "Emily, what happened?" Her voice trembled, thick with disbelief. Emily opened her mouth, but no words came out. She could feel the weight of her actions pressing down on her chest like an unbearable weight, crushing the air from her lungs. Her mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions: guilt, anger, fear. She had spent so many years trying to push her mother away, to get some space, some control. But she never could have imagined that this would be the result. This wasn't freedom. This was the opposite. An irreversible consequence, a nightmare she could never undo. Her friends stepped closer, their eyes still searching her face for any hint of explanation. "Emily, talk to me," they pleaded, their voice breaking. "What did you do?" The question hung in the air, suffocating in its simplicity. It was the question Emily had been asking herself ever since it had happened. What had she done? And why? The truth was too complex, too painful to explain. How could she convey the years of resentment, the isolation, the sense of suffocation that had built up over time? How could she make anyone understand what had pushed her to this point? Finally she spoke. Her voice cracked and hollow. "I didn't mean it. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I just wanted it to stop. The constant control, the constant pressure. I couldn't breathe anymore." Her friend stood motionless, struggling to process what Emily had just said. They had no way of knowing the full extent of the years of tension that had slowly suffocated her, nor the fear Emily had lived with. The need for her mother's approval, the need for a semblance of control over her own life had led Emily to the breaking point. But now that it was over, now that the air was thick with the silence of her actions, she couldn't escape the feeling that there was no turning back. "Emily, you need to call the police," her friend said, voice steady, but laced with panic. "This isn't something you can just walk away from. You need help. This is serious." But Emily shook her head, her breath coming in ragged gasps. I can't. I don't want them to know. I don't want them to see me like this." Her hands were shaking uncontrollably, and she gripped the edge of the counter to steady herself. "I don't even know who I am anymore." The room felt suffocating, the weight of her actions hanging over her like a dark cloud. Her friend reached out, gently placing a hand on Emily's shoulder, but the touch only made Emily feel more alone. She had no idea what to do, where to go from here. Every decision she had ever made, every path she had taken, had led her to this irreversible point, and she couldn't fathom what came next. "I didn't want this," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. "I never wanted it to go this far, but I couldn't stop it. It just happened." Her friend's face twisted with a mixture of fear and compassion, but they didn't know how to help her. They didn't know how to pull her out of the darkness she was drowning in. Emily, you can't just keep this to yourself. This will destroy you. It will destroy both of you. Emily's thoughts began to spin faster. Her friend's words felt like a distant echo. What would happen to her now? Would anyone believe her if she told them what led to this? Could she even explain it? Her mind was a maze of twisted emotions, each thought colliding with the next. She wanted to scream, but her throat was dry. Her words caught in a knot that she couldn't untangle. I didn't know what else to do, she said, the tears finally spilling over. I just wanted to breathe again. But now, I've destroyed everything. The silence that followed was thick and suffocating. Her friend stepped back, clearly struggling to understand how to deal with the situation. We need to call someone. You can't hide this, Emily. But Emily was too far gone to listen. She had made her choice, and the weight of that decision was now more than she could bear. There was no escape from what had happened. She had taken a life, her mother's life, and now she had to face the consequences, whatever they may be. Her mind was in turmoil as she stood there, the reality of the situation settling in, piece by piece. There was no going back, no second chance, no way to undo the irreversible damage that had been done. All she could do was wait for whatever came next, and deep down, she knew one thing for certain. Her life would never be the same again. Emily? Hey, what's up? You okay?